Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Hult Virtual Skills Lab. My name is Colin, and I'm going to be hosting this session along with Professor Fisher today. It's great to see you all joining from all over the world. I saw some folks joining us from Nigeria, India, UAE, Canada, South Africa, China. So it's awesome to see how international our community is. We do like to see that. Just a few welcome remarks before we get started here. The Hult Virtual Skills Lab is a great opportunity for you to join with some like-minded people from all over the globe, like I just mentioned, and hear from our absolutely incredible professors on the latest topics and trends and really level up your knowledge in all things business and cultural. For any of you that might be joining Hult for the first time, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background information about us. Hult is a school that focuses on the future, firmly rooted in the real world of dynamic and global business. As a Hult student, your entire curriculum is geared toward practical experience that aims to transform your mind as well as your skill set. From our undergraduate programs through to specialized masters, full-time and part-time MBAs, and live online options, we bring together creative, open-minded people from all over the world. More information on our programs and upcoming scholarship deadlines can be found at our website, hult.edu. As I mentioned earlier, we're joined today by Hult Professor Matthew Fisher to explore the topic of Peloton, pricing strategy, and consumer behavior. His session will last approximately 45 minutes, give or take, with our Q&A portion at the end. So please make sure to include any questions you might have in the Q&A box, and the professor will get to those at the end of his session. We'll also make sure that the session is made available to you, a recording of it, following the class. And with that, I will hand it over to Professor Fisher. Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. One of the fun things about doing these sessions and teaching at Hult is this international perspective. So many of you jumping into the chat box here telling us where you're from. Normally, I would say good morning to everyone because I am actually in San Francisco and teaching, but for many of you, it's much later in the day. So for me, it's 7 a.m., but I'll still try to keep this as upbeat and energetic as I possibly can here. And of course, we're going to talk about and zero in on a case study that I wrote in the summer of 2020, won a case writing competition and is in publication on looking at Peloton and their brand communities and also their pricing strategy, which is really kind of what we're going to focus in on here today about talking about how we can utilize price and how it influences us in our strategies and effective marketing. And I like this particular case, well, not really because I wrote it, but I like this particular case because it allows us to think about a situation where I'm going to try to walk you through how we think about and how we utilize pricing strategies before you launch a product. And that is where, when it comes to pricing, things get really complex, actually really, really quickly. It's easy to look at products already in the market and brands that you already like and know and love, or maybe not, and think about how they're priced in relation to each other. It's way, way, way more difficult when you're still in the office, planning out, getting ready to launch the product, strategizing where you should position your product, and this challenge is actually compounded as soon as we start to have a new company involved as well. So it's not just pricing of the product, but then also, how well known is your brand? And if you're a new startup company, this actually becomes a lot more challenging here. Now, looking at the chat box and just seeing some of the places that we have present here, I'm assuming that some of you actually may be familiar with Peloton as a company, but then I also recognize that some of you might not be. So first off, Peloton is what we call a connected fitness company. And so their primary products are exercise products, but integrated with a lot of software and technology such that while you might be working out at home, you kind of get the feeling as though you might be connected with others or a little bit of that gym experience without actually being at the gym. And so this represents really kind of a new space within the fitness industry, and one that I think is actually pretty interesting from a variety of perspectives here. So we say Peloton, welcome to the Peloton. Peloton as a term is generally referencing when you have bicycle races, there always ends up being a large clump of riders that all ride kind of together, and that is actually known as a peloton. And so the connected fitness product of a Peloton is ultimately a spin bike. And the idea is that they want you to kind of feel, even though you're at home, feel as though you are working out with other people. So what we're going to think about here for a moment, and what we have in the picture here is a picture of an actual Peloton, the original bike, and it's still, they've had a couple of little tweaks to it, but essentially it's still the same bike there, in which you have a stationary exercise bike that has a monitor attached to the front, and it's going to be connected, and on that monitor they're going to actually stream spin classes. And so the primary question for this company would have, at the time was, and would be, what should we price this product at? What is it worth? And we want to understand that pricing isn't just adding up the price of the components into the product, although some companies will use that as their pricing strategy. It's not a particularly advanced pricing strategy, but that is one way, which you just add up the price of all the components and then you maybe add some margin to it. But we want to understand that pricing signals many things. And to make this concrete for everybody here, I want you to just imagine, have you ever gone to another country where you go into marketplaces and you encounter brands that maybe you're not familiar with? And what do you have left to signal to you whether this is a good product or a good brand or not? And for most of us, again, when you this is really apparent when you travel internationally. Some brands you've never heard of, and you're like, I've never heard of this brand. I have no background knowledge on it. Oftentimes, you'll look at the price relative to other products, and if there happens to be let's say there's a brand that you do know, you're going to probably compare the price to that brand that you are familiar with to signal to you, hey, this should be a good, reputable product and brand. So the price has a lot built into it beyond just the monetary cost. And ultimately, one of the things that's probably really important here to differentiate is that we have a spin bike versus a stationary bike. Now, this distinction is quite important because a spin bike, like the picture there, where she's kind of standing up and she's spinning on it, these are bikes that take a beating. They need to be built to a higher quality standard. They need to be more rugged and durable than a regular stationary bike. So when I say a regular stationary bike, when I say an exercise bike, most of you probably conjure up in your head what an exercise bike looks like, and you're like, hey, maybe I've seen somebody selling these at a garage sale, or I've seen them in someone's garage. Yeah, that's usually not the same kind of bike as a spin bike. A spin bike, again, has to be able to really take a beating. So number one, when we talk about a spin bike, we're already talking about something on a little bit higher level, at least as far as its quality of construction goes and what it needs to be able to withstand. So that alone is already going to tell us that, hey, this should probably cost a little bit more than that regular exercise bike that you saw in your neighbor's garage that no one's used in years. So the most common pricing strategies that are used by companies is, number one, cost plus, which I've already kind of alluded to that here in a moment. That is basically, add up the price of all the components and then maybe tack on a profit margin of a certain percent or a certain dollar amount that it wants to be made. Now, this is the most basic, straightforward pricing strategy that there is. It's what I would call adequate. It'll do the job, but it doesn't really allow you to use pricing to help you position your product and your brand in the marketplace, other than just looking at, again, what are the cost of the components. The next one we have is competitive. Now, this is what many entrepreneurs and small business owners engage in, is if they're not going to do cost plus, they're going to basically look at what do their competitors charge and then try to position their product and pricing relative to their competitors. So if I'm a new entrepreneur and I have a product that maybe I have better components into my product itself, and my competitor is charging a certain price, and I'm like, well, mine's better than theirs, then I'm probably going to use their pricing and then add on a little bit to kind of signal or align my pricing to be pretty close to my competitors. Now, this is a slightly more advanced pricing strategy, but again, it's very much relying upon the external factors that are out there. And so there's, as we like to say as a marketing professor, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. The next one, and this is one that you're all actually familiar with, skimming and penetration pricing. So skimming. This is the idea that I'm going to introduce the product and I'm going to start it out at usually a really high price. I'm going to start really, really high because there's some people who have more money than good sense and they'll spend money on anything and pay almost any price. So let's introduce the product really early at a high price point. They'll be willing to spend it because they got more money than they know what to do with. And I can capture that. And as demand starts to drop, then I'll bring the price down. And so this is, again, a lot of your, like, sometimes electronics and computer prices and whatnot. They start out higher, and as they get older, sometimes they bring the price down. By contrast, penetration pricing, a lot of startup companies will engage in, putting a price very, very low with the idea that they will attract consumers. And so, like, if it's like, say, subscription services, they oftentimes will have a very, very low price to get you to sign up, a price that might even be at a loss for the company. But the idea is hoping that by you trialing the product that you will then, or the service, subscription, whatever, that you'll stick with it and you'll like it. And then when the price goes up, you'll stay with them. That's ultimately their goal. And then the last one here, and this is really what we're going to zero in on, and this is something that, in the realm of marketing, this is where we tend to spend most of our time, which is value-based pricing. And this is putting the price reflective of the value that we actually deliver to the consumer. And the funny thing about when it comes to pricing is that if you're going to deliver value to consumers, they're willing to pay for it. So I often say in all of my marketing classes, you compete on price in the absence of value. And in fact, that's usually my way of kind of poking fun at some of my students to be like, look, if you can't find anything else to compete upon, then you need to brush up on your marketing skills. You need to find something else to compete on, because if you don't have any value delivery methods, then the only thing left is price. And that only works really well if you're the low price provider there. But we want to usually, for your marketer, we want to deliver more value than that. So in the fitness space, let's understand the marketplace. So first off, this is a pretty crowded market. Fitness and fitness products and gimmicks and diets have been around for, forever, it seems like. But we would say, number one, we have different formats. So we've got spas, we've got gyms, we got really small places, little boutique gym places. There's also the whole realm of buying fitness equipment for your own home, so the home equipment market here. Now, if you think about gym memberships, one of the things that makes this kind of an interesting marketplace from a marketing perspective here is that gyms are constantly running specials, trying to attract new members. And if you even think about things like the new year here, I put in the second bullet there, memberships skyrocket around the new year because everyone's like, hey, this year's going to be different. I'm going to get that 6-pack of abs. I'm going to work out. I'm going to be super fit. And then basically by March or April, so January, February, the gym is insanely crowded. By March or April, it's like a ghost town. There's tumbleweed blowing through the place. Why? Because people realize that they haven't changed their behaviors. They can't seem to stick with the schedule. And so their enthusiasm drops. So gyms are constantly running membership specials to get people to sign up because they're always losing members. We call this churn. Churn is very high in the gym fitness space. In fact, when we talk about churn, what percentage of your customers do you have that you started with at the beginning of the year? That's one of the metrics that we sometimes look at with different firms and companies. And in gyms, sometimes churn can be anywhere between 75 and 100%. So if you start with 100 members at the beginning of the year, you're going to lose 75 or 80 of them. So you got to find another 75 or 80, new members to replace the ones that you're going to lose. Now, when it comes to fitness and consumer behavior, we understand that when we want to form new habits, we oftentimes are only successful when we have social bonds with others. So if you've ever had that advice, like you should work out with a friend, the idea behind that is it's not just sticking you to a schedule. It's the fact that as you have a social bond, you start to feel obligated and it helps you formulate new habits. We know from consumer behavior research that it takes about 3 weeks of being very consistent with starting a new habit for it to take hold. And so it's really easy to say, hey, I'm going to start a new habit, and then a week later you forget. But if you can stick with it for more than 3 weeks, then you kind of get into this mindset and this habit that kind of reinforces it. And you'll feel a little guilty if you violate it. And same thing with a social bond. You get up one morning and you're just like, oh man, I'm really tired. And then your friend says, hey, you ready to work out? You're going to feel that social pull to get you to get around, even though you really don't want to. And same time that will, your friend, you might get up and go, hey, I'm ready to work out. And your friend's like, oh, all right, I'll be there in just a moment. So we want to understand that this social bond, this interaction helps reinforce habits. And this is one of the reasons why the fitness space has such high turnover, is many people don't form these social bonds. And so it's very easy to abandon what they were doing. Now, whenever we're talking about marketing, and this might be a refresher for many of you, one of the most fundamental kind of frameworks that we use is STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. The idea is you want to look at the marketplace and you want to break it into pieces, you segment it, and then you figure out who it is, the customers that are really kind of a fit for your product and offering, and say, hey, these are the consumers I want to aim for. And then ultimately you position your offering both in the features, the value delivery, and the pricing and everything to be appealing to those targeted consumers. Now, this is a really, really basic framework, but it's extremely important because whenever you go in, or at least whenever I go in, I'm speaking to a business, one of the very first primary questions I ask them, always, who are your customers? And if they can't tell me, then you're like, oh boy, they need help. They need to be able to, a business needs to be able to say who their customers are. And if they can't clearly articulate who that is, it oftentimes means that they don't know who their customers are, which pretty much means that everything else that they do is going to be a hot mess because of the fact that they don't really know who they're marketing to. So anybody who ever says, the customer is always right, if that's how they respond to who are your customers, you're like, oh boy, this place needs a mess. Clear out my schedule. This is a consulting gig that they need a lot of help. Now, when it came to the original founding CEO, John Foley, with Peloton, they started out with a price point of $1,200. But when they first launched the product, they actually found that demand was not very high. And it largely comes down to, again, is what does pricing signal? And so at a $1,200 price point, which is a price that they basically set with kind of a cost plus approach, like this is what it's going to cost us plus the margin that we need, $1,200 seems like a fair price. Well, most of the marketplace was not too excited about their product. Number one, they're a brand new company, brand new brand, no one ever heard of them before. And number two, this is the price point that they have. And really what that price point really kind of seemed to signal to consumers was that maybe this product is not very high quality. And I think that for many of you, if you've ever been to, like, say, Amazon and you look something up, you can find that, of course, Amazon will provide you way too many choices. And as you start to scroll through the pricing, sometimes the pricing will get really, really low, and you yourself will start to go, I don't know about this one. It's too cheap. Something's wrong here. And so basically that's kind of the idea here, is that when they started at the $1,200, again, it wasn't really connecting with consumers. But once they actually revised the price up, then it signaled to people that it must be their expectations of quality should be satisfied because the price in their head matches and aligns with what their expectations are. So the initial launch of the product was, they started out at a $2,200 price point, which they lowered to about $1,900, and they've actually more recently dropped it a little bit even further here. But the initial launch here, and what we're really focused in on here, is how they initially started this here. One of the ways to overcome anybody's reservations around the price point here was they started out with having easy financing here. So 0% financing. So, you don't have to shell out all this money up front. We'll do it in payments. And then you also have a monthly subscription for the actual classes themselves, which they initially started at $39. Now, some of you might know the company and go, hey, didn't they recently raise it to $45? The answer is yes, they did. But again, we're looking at when they first launched this, when they were still fresh. Now, for anybody that didn't want to buy the bike, one of the smart things that they had was that you could also have just their mobile app, in which you could get access to all of their content classes, even though you didn't have the bike itself. So let's say you had a non-Peloton branded bike, but you recognize that, hey, these classes are kind of fun. I want access to that. That's fine. They got you, boo. You can come in at $12.99 a month to have access to the content just without all the metrics and stuff that would normally come with the full bike. So a couple of different avenues and channels here, depending upon the type of customer that they're appealing to. So already, segmentation. We may have the full-blown customer who is all about the bike and is ready to slap the money down, but we may have the more value-oriented consumer who is like, yeah, I either already own an exercise bike or I'm not going to spend $2,200 on this bike, but I'm willing to shell out $12.99 for the content. So again, a channel for the avenue, for the value-oriented consumer. So the question that I generally pose when I teach this case study to students is say, number one, is it too expensive? Now, one of the things that I like to use this particular case study for pricing strategy and discussions around pricing is that number one, it's always susceptible, and anything in the fitness space is susceptible to this first argument here, which I call the nature argument. The nature argument or the naturalistic argument. And that is, you will always find people who, doesn't matter what the price point is in the fitness space, they'll say it's too expensive. And what do I mean by that? Again, it doesn't matter what the price to the gym is. Somebody will say, whether it's $100, whether it's $50, whether it's $20, whether it's $10. Someone's going to say, why should you spend money on that? You want to lift weights? Go outside and lift heavy rocks. You want to, work on a Stairmaster? Well, go up and down the stairs of an apartment building. You want to go out for a run? Go run outside. Why do you need to pay money for that? So number one, we already want to understand that if you don't segment the market out, you're going to be susceptible to this nature argument, which is always going to challenge you on like, it's too expensive, it's too expensive, it's too expensive. As soon as you understand that the nature argument and these value consumers, they're not your target, you can slide them aside. Now, if we deliver value, there definitely is an upper bound. There's a certain limit. We can't just charge anything that we want. We need the market to be big enough. So while we can slide aside those that are going to argue that, hey, it's too expensive, there is still a limit on that. So ultimately it comes down to, what is the consumer actually paying for? And if they're getting value from it, then there's usually good evidence and reason that they would be willing to pay it. Now, the Peloton experience. So here's just a quick little shot of one of their stores. But the idea is that I also want you to see that if you're not familiar with the Peloton, if you can look on the screen just a little bit, you can see a bit of an instructor there. And the idea is that it's going to, that screen and the way you're positioned on the bike, it actually kind of sort of makes you feel like, and again, you're aware that you're not in a studio, but it feels like you are actually in the studio and the instructor's right there, and not only do you have music playing, they're giving some guidance, you're getting a bunch of metrics. You also have along the side of the screen what they call the leaderboard, that this would be other people that are in the class with you. So again, it kind of simulates the experience of being in a spin studio without ever actually being in the studio itself. So I do see one quick question here that I'm gonna address this one in just a moment here. So Catherine, I just wanted you to know I do see the question, but let me hold on for just a moment on that one. I'm gonna get just a little step further here. So again, the idea here is that we want to understand, when it comes to a gym, the other thing I want to add in, why experiences are so important when it comes to the fitness space, is I want you all to think for just a moment about your local, your home market, your home city and whatnot, and whether or not you have a gym membership or not. And even if you don't have a gym membership, think about, do you know anybody that does? I'm assuming that almost all of you probably do. Now, gyms come in a different, whole different variety of kind of price points and amenities. If the purpose of having a gym membership is only to say lift weights or run on the treadmill, then everyone should gravitate towards the cheapest option. And maybe the most convenient one. So if there's a gym really close by, you might be willing to pay a couple extra dollars for the local gym versus the one that's on the other side of town because it's not convenient. But really, everyone should gravitate towards the lowest offering. But many of you might already know either yourself or somebody who is enrolled in a little bit higher end gym or a spa. In fact, at the Hult San Francisco campus, we literally have it across the street. There's this great big, the Bay Club, a great big giant gym / spa. And in fact, it's so freaking nice. I sometimes joke, I'm not sure any actual fitness is going on there, because everyone that goes in there is dressed from head to toe in like their Lululemon, and they've been looking good going to the gym. And it's got all these really nice amenities. And just like in the picture there, it's like got the couches and everything. You're like, is anybody actually doing any working out and sweating in there? Because I don't actually see it. It's like such a place to see and be seen. I say that because it's about the experience. And that's where people start to be willing to pay for something premium. And when we understand that, it goes a long way to helping us adjust our pricing. Now, the holistic approach. So what would it be? What would be the value drivers that could influence us being able to charge more for a Peloton bike? So number one, I put the indirect time cost. Think about whenever you've gone to the gym or you're going to go work out with somebody. All of you. I bet there was some time involved in things like, oh, I need to get my workout gear around. I need to have the right stuff. I need to pack my bag. If I were ever to say, if I were ever to challenge some of you to say, hey, how long does it take to fly to somebody, wherever the last place you flew to? Most of you would tell me how long the flight was, but you wouldn't tell me. So let's say you flew, I'll just make up something out here in California. If you're going to fly from San Francisco to LA, I don't know why you'd want to do that, because San Francisco is way better than LA. But if you were going to, it's like a 1 hour plane flight. But that doesn't include the time it took to drive to the airport, the time it took to check in your bags and go through security and wait for them to load the plane. And then once you land, the time to get off the plane, to get you, if you have baggage, to then find a car to actually go where it is you really want to go. So the things that we sometimes don't think about. So while your workout class might only be 50 minutes or an hour, you might actually spend nearly 2 hours in total for, some time before and some time after. So the indirect time costs are lost. Those are things that can impede people's ability to stick with their habits. They get up a little late one morning for work and they're like, oh, I don't have time to go to the gym. Convenience, just getting things around. Having a spin bike in your house that can kind of give almost as good of an experience has a significant convenience factor. And when it comes down to how people actually purchase things, like sometimes I challenge my students, I go, how many of you shop at Amazon? Which is nearly everybody. And I say, why do you shop there? And sometimes someone will kind of fall for it and they'll say, oh, the pricing's pretty good. I'm like, no, it's not. You don't have to search that hard to find better pricing than Amazon, but why do people shop there? Because of convenience. And that's where I sometimes joke with students, they go, because you're lazy. No, and we all do it, but the idea is that convenience is really important here. Now, choice. Now this is where the Peloton offers a value dimension that gyms can't. So gyms might have a spin class, but they're probably going to have one spin class with one instructor, and that's the format. You have to be there at the time that the class starts, or you're just out of luck. Whereas with Peloton, you've got dozens of instructors, different time formats, different focus. So let's say you want to do a high intensity interval training, you can do that. You want to do an endurance ride, which is a little slower, kind of a slow climb. There's a bunch of rides where they're like maybe artist oriented. So they had a Lizzo ride here not that long ago. They have some that are different themes, different time eras, 90s ride, 2000s ride, hip hop ride, heavy metal ride. They've got all these different varieties and choices, and they come in different class formats. So that day that you're waking up and you're like, yeah, you know what? I normally would work out for an hour, but I'm running a little bit late this morning. That's okay. You can jump on and you can do a 45-minute ride, or a 30-minute ride, or a 20-minute ride, or a 15-minute ride, or a 10-minute ride, or you could stack a few rides. The idea being is that it's giving the consumers a lot of choice to overcome objections that might normally. So actually, Prashi, I see your question here. What do you do when they're coming up with similar products? So one quick moment, I'm actually going to address that one, and then I'm also going to get Catherine's question. So I just want you both to know I see those questions. Next point here is we have vanity. So again, I already kind of talked a little bit about for a quick second there about how you might put your bag together to go to the gym and whatnot. And if anybody in here has ever been in a spin class, this is one of those where I almost wish I could just look out in the audience, everybody raise their hand who's done a spin class before or not. If you've ever done a spin class, You become a hot, sweaty mess. In fact, it's almost disgusting. In fact, whenever I do a spin class, I know this is art you never wanted commissioned, but I'm a sweaty mess after a spin class. That's something that a lot of people don't necessarily. I mean, it's so bad. It's almost like you fell in a pool. Like you just you're like, oh my god, I'm so gross. But it's a great workout because it's going to work you, and you're going to sweat a lot. And some people, while they still might be willing to wear their, that old T-shirt to the gym and whatnot, they still want to, look good for other folks. Which is where my joke a little bit earlier about the gym across the street, where everyone has their brand new exercise gear to the point that everyone's, dressed to the point that you wonder if anyone's actually working out. Is that there is this vanity component that everybody wants. Next, we got comparable costs. So how much do you actually spend on a gym membership? And that is where that can already start to kind of justify a little bit here of how much you spend. So the $39 a month for the Peloton and the spin classes, well, if you were spending $75 or $80 or $100 a month on a gym membership, then the Peloton is actually a pretty inexpensive alternative to a gym membership. Lastly, and this is the one that is usually most consumers lose sight of this one, and that is, at least for the first 2 years, recently this is more of a challenge for Peloton, but Peloton has emerged as the kind of leader of the connected fitness brand and space. And so this kind of comes to Prashi's question here about what happens when the challengers come out. So there have been direct competitors to Peloton, but they have not really gotten the attention that other the alternatives, they just haven't gotten attention for. So Echelon was one. A couple of them actually already gone belly up. They haven't done as well. So the Peloton position themselves as the affluent brand. They're like the Apple of connected fitness. And with that brand recognition, the power of the brand goes to the last point, resale. So when consumers were evaluating the Peloton versus alternatives, you could save a few $100s by buying a non-Peloton branded piece of equipment. The problem is that if you found that you weren't actually using it, because the brands were lesser known, when you would try to go sell it, you wouldn't get back nearly as much money. Whereas the Peloton, at least for the first couple of years here, they actually had found that if you were to try to sell the Peloton, you basically could sell it for almost as much money as you paid for it. So in many respects, the Peloton actually became, quote unquote, the cheaper option, even though they were priced higher up front because of the full total, the resale value, what you could get for it and how fast you could sell it. Now recently, post-COVID, this has become a little bit more challenging here. So, and Prashi's bringing up Equinox and SoulCycle. The founder actually, in creating Peloton, was specifically targeting and thinking of SoulCycle. So SoulCycle has a really fun experience when you take one of their classes in person. The problem is that they are at specific times and there's limited space in the studio. So if you arrive a little late or you're like, hey, I want to take my spin class, but sorry, it's already full. You're just out of luck here. And SoulCycle is very expensive in comparison to the Peloton. So if you're a SoulCycle consumer and you're thinking about, hey, let's check out one of these Pelotons, the price point is going to really hook you in. Now, if you don't do spin at all and you're looking at it like, this might seem a little bit expensive here. So, all right, so let me keep going here. I'm almost done here. So the question is, I would actually challenge many of my students with, when we start to think about all the value dimension drivers here, the fact that you eliminate the excuses and the time that you lose going to the gym and back, when you look at the variety that it offers, the different music formats, the different instructors, the different programs that you can kind of tailor it to your own needs and what you want for the day. Maybe you had one too many drinks last night and you're recovering, so you want to go with something a little lower, or another days you're ready to just crush it. Then also factor that in with the brand recognition and the appeal of the Peloton brand versus alternatives. Then you could make the argument that the bike is actually underpriced, that it probably could have been more expensive. Also, one of the things that's very, very smart about Peloton as a company is that their membership is actually tied to the bike, not the individual. And this matters for households. Now, if you live by yourself, this is not as big of a deal. But it is a big deal if you live with someone and have an extended family. You can have up to 6 people on one Peloton subscription. So that $39 a month that you're paying, let's say there's 2 of you, well then really it's only $20 a person. And so with that, and if you ever decide to sell the bike, the subscriptions are tied to the bike. Sorry, my watch decided to help out here. The subscription is tied to the bike, so that really ends up making it even a more attractive price point. The last one here, and one that I don't have a lot of time to go into today just because of time constraints here, and one of the things that really makes Peloton a real standout company is the fact that you end up building a community with the other people that are riding. So even though you're at home by yourself on the Peloton bike, it's very, very easy to engage through different social media platforms, be it Reddit, be it Facebook, different areas here. What you can find is that the people start to build a community with each other, and they start to become accountable to each other, which keeps people engaged. And that's one of the real kind of value drivers around Peloton, is the brand community. And that is manifest in that when I told you back early in the presentation that churn for many gyms and spas and whatnot can be anywhere between 75 and 100%, the churn for a Peloton is less than 1%. So when people buy these things, they're using them and they're staying engaged. And when it comes down to evaluating a company and the metrics and the core of the company, this very, very low churn number is like one of the things that I look for whenever I'm reading articles, different financial analysts, giving their idea of what they think the company ought to be worth. If they don't mention the customer engagement and the low churn number, I tend to largely set their analysis aside, being like, yeah, they don't get it. They don't understand the full value of this thing. Now, with that being said, there can definitely be some challenges here. So during COVID-19, Peloton skyrocketed in popularity. If you ordered a bike, it might take 4 months to get it. With COVID-19, they used to have, with the classes, you had the instructor, but you could also see other people in the studio. So again, it really did kind of simulate and feel like you were with them in the studio. Well, once we had COVID-19 here and they couldn't have people in the studios, they started filming them directly. So it would be just the instructor, and in some cases, they were filming them at the instructors' homes, the classes. Now, the demand skyrockets, and then ultimately, the big question being is, when is there going to be a return to the studio experience? Now, with COVID here, and for some of you who might know Peloton as a company, you might be like, hey, Fisher, you're talking about this company, but they've had some challenges here. So the quote that I had of their founding CEO, he was relatively recently kind of forced out, and he was forced out because he really made some real managerial missteps. In fact, there was one investment fund that went ahead and put on a presentation with bullet points of all the managerial missteps and bad decisions that were made, and quite honestly, it was pretty damning. I happen to like Peloton as a company, again, from a marketing perspective, and when I saw that list, I was like, ooh, that's bad. They really did nail him to the cross there. And he stepped out, and there's new management in place. So with that, the company financially has had some challenges more recently, in that post-COVID here, people have been going back to the gym in definitely larger numbers than were anticipated. So their demand softened quite a bit here. And as they've had some inventory buildup because they were thinking that it was going to really carry out, they've had a number of pricing specials where they've dropped the price to try to move some of this inventory. So while there, again, is some managerial kind of weaknesses in the company currently, the core of the company, the product itself and the value that it's driving, is still exemplary here. So this largely brings me mostly to the end of the content here. So let me kind of shift over to our Q&A, and let me come back around to Catherine, she was so kind to put her first question in there, and I asked if we could kind of put it aside here. So is it difficult to raise your price once you've introduced your product? So in general, the answer is yes. Going up in price is generally more challenging than lowering your price. Now, there are some exceptions to this. So this is something more advanced than what I have time for here today. but there's something called Veblen goods or luxury goods. So sometimes luxury brands and luxury products, when they raise their price, demand actually goes up because people realize, like, oh my gosh, it's more exclusive. But generally, if you're going to raise your price, you need to add something to your offering to justify it. So if you're only going to take the price and just flat out raise it with nothing new, usually consumers are going to take notice. Different journalists are going to write stories around it. They're like, hey, they raised their price and you're not getting anything extra for it. It's not going to be perceived very well. Now, if you raise your price, but you add features or you add something to it, even if the price is well beyond the features, then it's easier to justify it. So if you're going to, so my thing would always be, if you're going to raise your price, deliver something new, deliver something more. And oftentimes consumers will not resist the price increase. Sometimes it's what it has to be here. And Peloton has actually done that. They have a bike, and then they have a bike plus, and the bike plus costs a little bit more, and the screen can swivel, and it's some minor features, but some people really like that, and they were okay with it. I personally was like, whatever. But that helps give you some ideas. So it's easy to lower a price. It's much harder to go back up. This company was able to pull it off because they were a brand new company and no one knew who they were. So when they first kind of tested launching the basically like a Kickstarter, the bike at a price of $1,200, they weren't getting a lot of responses on that. But again, because it was such a small, like nobody really knew who they were, it was easier for them to basically kind of just raise the price as they increase through marketing and advertising, brand awareness. Many people never knew that the price ever was at $1,200. So to them, the price was just around the $2,000 price point there. So Catherine, I hope that answers that question for the most part here. Let's see here. For example, Equinox. Okay, question on current situation. People prefer to escape from online platforms, especially from COVID, as they obligate the house. Why we should prefer to continue our old methods even after the pandemic. I can guarantee the old strategies work. So Mohammed, what we have here is this kind of comes down to knowing what your value drivers are. So while demand has definitely softened as we've come out of COVID, we say demand has softened for the Peloton because really they scaled up to have expecting demand to just really stay super, super high. And they're still bringing on new users and still product, but at a lower level than what they were forecasting. And what ultimately it comes down to is some people just don't like to work out at the gym. And in fact, if you really think through this one, this is a very, very common thing. That different, there are some gyms out there that cater, say, I know that there's one locally here that is only for women. And they're just like, hey, that's kind of our thing is, that sometimes men in the gym can, act stupid and sometimes women feel uncomfortable in the gym. So we created a gym just for women. And there's all these different types of gyms and formats out there. But being able to work out at home when you're going to be a hot, sweaty mess, there's still an appeal to that. And there's a convenience factor for that. So this was one where the customer churn has stayed extremely low. So Mohammed, your question is absolutely valid, but so far with connected fitness, this doesn't seem to be going away. It doesn't seem to be going away, and the idea is the Peloton is able to successfully simulate the classroom experience and facilitate social bonds, even though you're not physically there. And yes, of course, there are some people who are like, yeah, I want to go back out into public and I want to be, there's some people who want to go back to the gym, who like the gym. But I'll just speak for myself. I would much rather go out into public and have lunch, have dinner, socialize with some friends. They do not need to see me when I'm a hot, sweaty mess. And clearly, I need to use my Peloton more. No, nobody? Well, I thought it was funny. So, I don't want people to see me when, again, it looks like I fell in a dunk tank of sweat. I don't want them to see me for that. So this seems to be like, hey, it's okay. Also, for a person going into the food industry where target customers are from households, retailers, and food stores, given that they already exist, big companies in the same industry, how can a startup with much more value offerings break into the food industry? So food industry, so this is where pricing strategy is going to be for the food industry, and depending upon what you're talking about restaurants, you're talking about packaged goods, Very, very wide question here, so I'm going to try to answer this question as best I can, but I will admit to you it's going to be a partially satisfying answer because the question's so broad. So, if it's going to be, say, a packaged good, pricing matters, but you're probably going to need to factor in other things. So building brand awareness, authenticity is something that can drive success in the food industry. Farm to table, where do the ingredients come from? Connection to local, handcrafted, artisanal. These are all things that could help a small startup company be successful in the competitive landscape of large competitors. So I'm in California, so going to farmers markets is awesome because they've got like everything. But farmers markets, depending upon where you are around the world, they might be bigger, they might be smaller. But I think a farmers market is oftentimes a good example that these are people with products that they are selling them locally. And why do you like to go to the farmers market? It can be for the outing. It can be for feeling like you're closer to the actual food itself, being a bit of a better connection here, meeting the farmer who actually grew it versus buying it from the supermarket where it came from who knows where. I don't know where, I don't know any of that sort of stuff. Some people say that it also tastes better. I personally think it does. I think tomatoes taste better when you buy them from the farmer's market. A little bit has to do with how they're harvested, but you can get more value that way. If you're going to define success as I have to be as successful as Unilever or Nestle or something like that, then of course that's going to be much, much harder, but you can break into it and it can be done, but it's probably not going to be pricing strategy as being the primary driver on that one. It's going to need to be more component driven and story and brand driven. So I know that's a partially satisfying answer, but the idea is that you definitely can do it. Okay. So one of the things, I guess, my last little concluding slides here is just kind of what it is that we do at Hult is a little bit different. I did conduct this where I'm talking to you because of the large audience and the limited time here, but in the classes, you would be probably talking just as much as I would be as we go back and forth and we discuss. So this really experiential learning environment here. We got the global campuses and the global student body. I've taught at several schools, but this is the one institution where just last term I had a class, I think I had 50 students in the class, and I had something like 42 countries represented, and that's amazing. I've taught at other schools where we have some international students, but usually not very many, and they oftentimes kind of form cliques, and they tend to not interact with each other all that well. Where at Hult, because there's such broad diversity, it really forces you to get to know other people, and in fact, we even when we put you into groups, we kind of engineer it so that you definitely interact, and you really truly build that international network, something that you're just not going to get at any other school. One of the last points here, you engage with a lot of practitioner professionals. So I write a lot of case studies. So like if I were to actually assign you my Peloton case study, we could discuss it, we could analyze it. But I'm also the one who did the research and all the writing there. Many of your professors publish books. They teach at a variety of schools. So you really get to engage with people that are working in industry and that are actually publishing. And while other colleges and universities will have faculty, sometimes they haven't published anything in decades. Where you get, our whole faculty is engaged. And the last point I'm going to make here is that part of the reason why many of you are probably interested in pursuing a graduate degree is you want to get ahead in your career. But diving a little bit deeper into that, how do you get ahead in your career? Well, it's developing advanced skills and insights, and oftentimes that comes from the curriculum and the courses that are offered to you. So here's just a couple of classes that we have to offer that very, very few other schools even have. So I recently taught sustainable brands and products about really, how to leverage that. So the question around food, that would have been a great question for my sustainable brands and products class. Crypto, blockchain, neuromarketing. That class is taught by some of my colleagues, Prince Booman and Matt Johnson, who just published a book on that. Really, really unique course offerings that, again, are things that you oftentimes are just not even going to get at other schools. And so if having knowledge and unique knowledge is going to be key for you delivering more value to your organizations, it stands to reason that it's going to allow you to be more upwardly mobile in your career. So it's not just get the degree, it's the curriculum that goes along with it that makes that degree valuable, and having unique and current classes is something that really differentiates Hult from other schools. So I tried to go through and that was a comment there. How do you justify price increment for a free product, say bread, when the current price of raw materials have significantly increased? How can you add an additional offering? So Jeremiah, this can come down to things like, again, this is where you start to do branding and storytelling. And so some of the things that you may have to raise the price just a little bit is just because of, okay, raw materials have gone up. So that can justify it a little bit and kind of give you a little bit of cover. But the other thing that you oftentimes need to do is you need to build the brand by telling the story. It's not just bread. No, 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 no. This is handcrafted artisanal bread made by Bob and Sarah, who make it themselves. They wake up every morning at 3 in the morning, and they get the stone ground flour. And the idea is you start telling a story, and that starts to add value to the product. Branding and perceptions of value are things that are in our head as much as it is the physical product. Many companies, many startups, many individuals make very good products, but they don't understand the psychology dimension. And when you do understand the psychology dimension, it makes it easier to move pricing and deliver value in ways that people sometimes don't see. My last comment here before I turn it over here is, and this is just a quick little fun one because you guys have asked a couple of questions on this one. Vodka, by definition, I'm not talking about that flavored stuff. Vodka, raw vodka, colorless, flavorless, odorless. If it's colorless, flavorless, and odorless, then what the heck would anybody pay a price premium for vodka for? That's all branding. It's all psychology. It's all in your head. I sometimes make this joke to students. I go, hey, and if you don't believe me, you should buy the cheapest, nastiest vodka you can find on the market if you're going to consume vodka. Because again, by definition, colorless, flavorless, odorless. Now somebody will always say, hangover, blah, blah, blah. I go, look, no. Go get yourself 3 different types of vodka. Pour yourself 3 shots of each one. Why? Because it's more fun this way. 3 shots of each one. And if you can't pick out, and the reason I say do 3 of them, because sometimes you could guess right. So you got to set it up, the experiment correctly. If you can't pick out the premium one every single time, 100% accurate, then it's all in your head. And if it's all in your head, why are you paying the price premium for? If you're going to go to the club and you're going to mix that with some cranberry juice or something, you should buy the cheapest vodka out there. Again, the point is we want to understand the psychology. And this is one of the things that makes marketing classes so much freaking fun. It's not just the components of the product, but it's also the psychology. I hope you found this engaging. I hope that this was kind of something fun for you here, and I hope I kind of got the creative juices and your curiosity going here. My contact information is right there. That, I think, concludes my time. So I'm going to hand the floor back over here. So please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Professor. That was a really great session. I know I learned something, so that was awesome. And like I said before, we'll be sure to make sure that this session is available to you, the recording of this session. If you're interested in any more events similar to the Virtual Skills Lab or anything otherwise, you can head over to hult.edu/events and you can find out more and register right there. Otherwise, that's all from us today. So thanks again for joining us, Professor, and thanks to all of you who joined in the audience. It was great having you, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.